Israel is deliberately starving Gaza to death. This is no baseless conspiracy theory. Israel promised to do this openly from the very start, with the Defence Minister, Yoav Gallant, publicly declaring on the 9th of October that the essentials of life, including food and energy, would be blocked from entering Gaza on the grounds that Israel was fighting human animals, with the Israeli Army Coordinator of Kogatz, the agency charged with overseeing Israeli operations in the occupied territories, subsequently clarifying, for those naive enough to believe otherwise or disingenuous, that by human animals, Israel meant the civilian population of Gaza. Now, there are many ways that the Israeli state has starved the Palestinian people in Gaza, resulting in the fastest decline in the nutritional status of a population in recorded history. But one means is allowing right-wing extremists to block and attack, in this case, as I'll show you, Jordanian aid trucks from entering Gaza. So deliberately standing back while aid trucks meant for those starving to death, deprived of the basics of life in Gaza, blocking that from getting in with no intervention from the states. Now, in footage which was recorded and placed online, you can see these extremists blocking aid trucks with the Israeli authorities doing nothing and throwing out their contents and destroying their contents. Let's have a look. Indeed, footage shows them attacking trucks attempting to bring food into Gaza. They specifically destroyed bags of flour on aid trucks headed into Gaza. Now, as the courageous Israeli human rights organisation B'Tselem put it, this happened for hours in the presence of Israeli forces who didn't intervene. This flies in the face of the ICJ, that's the International Court of Justice, that issued provisional measures to force Israel to enable humanitarian assistance. Furthermore, today, Israeli extremists set fire to humanitarian aid coming in from Jordan. Now, a crucial point, this is a crucial point, these aren't just some random right-wing extremists. They have behaved like this for months, repeatedly and successfully blocking aid, all under the watchful gaze of the Israeli authorities. For those who believe the Israeli authorities are soft touch, who aren't fond of brutally dispersing those they deem to be a problem, or indeed arresting or killing them, well, where to begin? It's not just, of course, their slaughter of Palestinians in the West Bank, where around 500 Palestinians have been killed by Israeli security forces and settlers, many of them children, since the 7th of October. In Tel Aviv, Israeli police have brutally smashed protests by Jewish Israeli citizens who were protesting against Benjamin Netanyahu's regime, using water cannon and arresting protesters. Indeed, there has been police brutality against the relatives of Israeli hostages. Now, according to the testimonies of two courageous Israeli women who tried to stop the thugs from attacking the aid trucks, which we saw earlier, and thanks here to the translation of a brilliant Israeli Jewish leftist activist who posed anonymously under the Twitter handle @IReallyHateYou, great name, do check him out. But this is what they said: there were very few security forces and police on the scene who did nothing to stop the destruction but stood aside. Now, one of the settlers physically attacked one of these women. A police officer refused to detain him, and he returned to the destruction. They said, these two women, the police did not call for additional forces or try to block the arrival of those they describe as the criminals, including armed settlers. They say in all that time, we did not see a single arrest, and all that was done was the useless removal of a few who immediately returned to continue. Now, in this particular case, it's important to note, when we're talking about this, the provisional orders mentioned by B'Tselem, issued in January this year. So the International Court of Justice ordered the Israeli state to, and I quote, take immediate and effective measures to enable the provision of urgently needed basic services and humanitarian aid in order to prevent genocide from taking place. Now, at the end of March, the ICJ issued a subsequent provisional order ordering Israel to increase the provision of basic humanitarian goods to Gaza, including food, water, fuel, shelter, adding the catastrophic living conditions of the Palestinians in the Gaza Strip has deteriorated further, in particular in view of the prolonged and widespread deprivation of food and other basic necessities to which the Palestinians in the Gaza Strip have been subjected. Adding, Palestinians in Gaza are no longer facing only a risk of famine, but that famine is setting in. Now, if Israel was truly interested in avoiding genocide, or indeed being found guilty of the charge of genocide, that's as grievous a charge as it gets, let alone interested in preserving the lives of Palestinians, it would look upon this blocking of aid as the gravest of crimes and clamp down on those responsible, arresting them en masse, charging and convicting them, and making it clear from the bully pulpit, for example, of the Prime Minister's office, that there would be no tolerance for these criminals. Yet, after months of these deliberate attempts to starve the people of Gaza, few have been arrested, while the authorities have stood back, as in this case, for hours while these attacks have taken place. In practical terms, the authorities have allowed these so-called protesters, in practical terms, genocidal maniacs, to block life-saving aid from entering Gaza. Indeed, back in March, the Israeli police blocked a humanitarian aid convoy organised by Standing Together, a peace movement bringing together Jewish and Palestinian citizens of Israel. Now, these are examples of courageous activists because they're isolated. Israel has become awash with genocidal mania. Polling consistently finds that a large majority of Israeli Jewish civilians, as opposed to the 20% of the population who are Palestinian citizens of Israel, oppose any humanitarian aid being allowed into Gaza. In practice, that means genocide. Of course it does. You block all the necessities of life from entering a besieged strip, they're all going to die. That's genocide. Now, I'm not quoting these polling figures to argue for collective guilt and punishment, by the way, as those supporting the genocidal onslaught against Gaza do. It's simply to be realistic about the current dynamics of Israeli public opinion, to make it clear the extremists that we've been looking at are not isolated, to make the case for why we need external pressure on Israel, just as we did in the case of apartheid South Africa, when most white South Africans were invested in supporting apartheid for a very long time. Now, famine stalks Gaza. Oxfam state that in northern Gaza, people are being forced to live on less than 12% of the recommended daily intake of calories. Indeed, last month, B'Tselem issued a report entitled Manufacturing Famine, Israel is committing the war crime of starvation in the Gaza Strip, not pulling punches there. The report begins by noting the Israeli airstrike on a World Central Kitchen convoy in early April, in which several foreign aid workers were killed, which led to the suspension of the work of multiple foreign aid agencies in Gaza, which those who attacked that aid convoy would have been fully aware would have been the consequences. Describes this report how for months Israel refused to let humanitarian aid in through the land crossings in Israel's territory, limiting what aid could enter, that when through international pressure Israel did allow aid through its territory, and I quote, the amounts were a far cry from the needs of the population. While Israel deliberately, repeatedly lied to the world that there was no serious nutritional crisis in Gaza in an attempt, of course, to prevent action from being taken to prevent famine. The report looks at how the integrated food security phase classification, classed by March, almost the entire population of Gaza is experiencing phase 3 level food insecurity or worse, with 500,000 at the highest level of food insecurity possible. Now, the how here is important. That includes how domestic food production and agriculture has been destroyed by incessant bombing following years of blockade, while huge numbers displaced from homes have little or no access to running water or to supplies and provisions needed for cooking. These are all elements which need to be discussed, as well as the fact that so little aid is coming in or is able to be distributed in Gaza for multiple reasons. But the fact is, you have to combine that with the effects of mass displacement and the destruction of food production and agriculture. How aid trucks go through a lengthy, arduous process is discussed by B'Tselem's report until they reach their destination, as well as how most aid supplies are transported from Egypt to Gaza in trucks via one of only 2 crossings, both in the southern Gaza Strip, with access to crossings made difficult and time-consuming, with many stops on the way, many searches on the way, with the trucks cargo checked multiple times, causing major delays. Only a fraction of that aid reaches northern Gaza due to restrictions imposed by Israel and, of course, severe damage to infrastructure. There's another element not discussed in the report about, for example, the targeting of police forces, police officers in Gaza by the Israeli state who are there to look after security for those aid trucks, which is obviously needed when you have a desperately starving population. Even the Biden administration has protested over that. The report looks at how Israel, and this is crucial, waged a war against UNRWA with a smear campaign based on no evidence. The main humanitarian agency in Gaza is UNRWA. And the report looks at how Palestinians have been massacred while trying to get food. That obviously has an impact in terms of deterrence from people trying to access food. But since the report, there's been a very specific escalation. Israel has seized control of the Rafah crossing, which is the primary route for aid getting into Gaza, and has escalated its attacks on Rafah, where most Gazans have fled after being ordered to flee on the basis they would be safe there. That has further blocked whatever limited aid was getting into Gaza in the first place. For the past week, no food has entered the two main crossings in southern Gaza, including the Rafah crossing. What we're discussing here is a genocidal campaign being waged by Israel against the Palestinian people in Gaza. Famine is one of the main elements, of course. The attempt to starve the population as well as deprive them of other essentials of life, which are needed to sustain human life. And there are other elements, of course, like the destruction of the medical system, the mass destruction of hospitals, the mass slaughter of medics, as well as mass displacement, as well as, of course, the mass bombardment that we see. These are all different elements of a genocidal campaign, which has clearly set out in accordance to what Israeli leaders and officials said they were going to do from the start, exact collective punishment against the people of Gaza on the basis that the Israeli state clearly does not want the Palestinian people to remain within Gaza. So mass slaughter, mass displacement, all key elements. And of course, this is the basis of their genocidal campaign. Allowing these right-wing extremists, who I'm afraid are not marginal in Israeli society, to block aid is just one means of this attack. There were multi-pronged assaults, if you like, for example, on the distribution of food. We need to speak out about this because the Israeli state and its allies are lying. And despite the hand-wringing of the Western states who have facilitated this from the very start, their complicity is clear to the whole world, as well as those of media outlets across the West who have cheered this on, legitimised it, and whitewashed the reality. We're not going to whitewash the reality, and we're going to keep speaking out. Please like and subscribe. Do leave your comments, as ever. Do share. Help us take on the pro-war media, as ever, at patreon.com/Sojourn84. Listen to the podcast. I'll speak to you soon.